Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest this time is the writer and artist Martina Skála, who grew up in Prague's pretty Malá Strana district before leaving for France in the mid-1980s and eventually settling in California. Martina studied history and set design and has had an unusually broad range of jobs, from acting as an advisor to the female leads on the Unbearable Lightness of Being to literally dancing with horses. And you'll hear all about those jobs and much more now in this edition of Prague Talk with Martina Skála. You grew up in Malá Strana in Prague. Could you please paint a picture of the Malá Strana of your young days?
Oh yes, of course. I grew up in Malá Strana in the time of communist, in a very old, shabby villa, falling apart, but in the middle of absolutely stunning, beautiful garden. It was the most beautiful views I ever had in my life, because from the windows I saw the castle and the church San Nicola, and I was walking down Vlašská, across the Charles Bridge. I actually never seen in my childhood a modern building. And this is somehow gave me recognized the code of beauty.
People say that Malá Strana was kind of like a village in those days. Is that true?
Yes, it was a village. And still today, when I come back from United States, I always live in Malá Strana. There are few people who I still know from my childhood, but, some of them died. A lot of them, they moved out. But for me, Malá Strana is still beautiful scenery. It feeds my soul.
And was it unusual to have a villa in that district?
We were not the owners. Somehow my parents managed to live in the villa, got the permit to live in the villa. But because the villa was very big, they had to ask their friends to stay in the villa as well. So it was a very surreal situation when my parents lived in the first floor. Then on the second floor lived the other family. And then I had to cross the second floor to get in my room, which was next to the bedroom of these other people. So basically we lived together, but totally different families with totally different values and especially view of upbringing the children.
Well, I understand that your parents were both bohemians with a small b. What did your folks do? What were their jobs?
My father was an architect and he was a social butterfly. He was absolutely the life of the party and a wonderful womanizer, because it was like a sport these days, because you couldn't make a career. So what do? You finish the job at 4 p.m. and then, you go. He was very good looking. So, that was the life. And my mother was chief of production department in National Gallery and then in UPM, Museum of Decorative Arts.
I hope this question is not too personal, but when did you realize that your dad was a womanizer, and how did you feel about it as a girl?
Well, I found it in a kind of maybe brutal way at this age, but funny way, and I wrote about it in my book, The Club of Chamise, that one day my mom was on the business trip and, my room was on the second floor, and then in the evening I found that the living room was very beautifully arranged. There was a bunch of roses and everything. And the bedroom of my parents was on the first floor, but it was a part of the library as well. So in the morning, I was like 14. I just decided I need a book to take with me to school. So I went to the bedroom, but my father just stepped out of the door and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "Well, I just need a book." And he said, "You are going nowhere." I said, "Yeah, I just need a book. Come on." And I just pushed him away. And I crossed the bedroom and there was this naked woman on her belly with long blonde hair. And I was shocked and I said, "Well, who is it?" And my father said, "Oh, that's my friend, a man, Karel, from Brno." I said, "What?" And he said, "Well, all the hotels were full in Prague, so I offered him to stay in a house." And I was absolutely mesmerized. It was like if I see my father first time in my life.
Well, that's either the best or the worst excuse ever, saying that the woman is a guy from Brno called Karel.
Karel, but funny thing is, Karel became the second wife of my father. And for many years, he still insists that it's a Karel.
I understand also that your grandparents had a relatively strong influence on you. You spent a lot of time with them?
Yes, my grandfather was a historian, and my grandmother was a historian of art. And yes, they were kind of old school. They spoke several languages, and I have a very deep admiration for academic education. That, you can talk about things which is not necessarily everyday life. And also my grandmother took me on the castles in Bohemia because she was curator of furniture and painting. So I traveled a lot with her, and it was a wonderful relationship.
I know you love horses. How did a girl from Malá Strana get into the world of horses?
Because I was dating, I had a boyfriend and he was riding a horses, so he took me to watch the horses at the racetrack. And it started that I started to care for them, to brush them, to give them a water. Then I was a hot walker, And then next step was I was sitting on them. And then on the end I got the jockey license so I could race. But I didn't race because I left Czechoslovakia before the first time I could really seriously race. But I was working every day and I was exercising thoroughbreds on the racetrack.
Your brother was in the band Psi Vojaci, who are very well known and highly respected. Did you hang out with them?
Tiny bit, not much, because we lived a little bit in fast lane, all of us. My father, my mother, my brother and me. So I was more like in the schools. My brother was in the concerts or at the police station. So yes, we kind of merged and then once again went on different directions. I was riding these horses at 6 a.m. My brother was coming at home.
You studied very different subjects, both history and set design. Were you able to work in either of those fields after you graduated in Prague?
Well, actually my my first job after I got my PhD in history was cleaning houses at Malá Strana. So I was sweeping the staircases and washing the staircase. And I was also working as an exercise rider for stables in Huchle because I didn't have a, history of my family. We were not communists.
So your class background wasn't going to lead to interesting or appropriate work?
No, but during the studies, I did work in the National Gallery as a guide on weekends. And I did work a little bit. I did a costume design for Theatre Rubin, Romeo and Juliet, but it was, very minimum.
In 1983, just around Christmas time, you left Czechoslovakia for Paris and you stayed there. When you went to Paris, were you planning to remain there or did you decide once you got there?
No, I decide, I am a little bit like the person who reads the sign, or I have a lot of imagination, and I thought that I will see how it goes. I had only 1 week for this decision, but somehow all the doors closed for me in Prague. I mean, I couldn't get a decent job. I really wanted to be a jockey, but my trainer told me I'm a little bit too old for it, which was true. I mean, I started to ride when I was 19, and all these young jockeys, they were there since they were 15 or 12. So he was right, and it was very hard work too. So he warned me, and then I couldn't get full-time job in National Gallery, so it was kind of bleak. So I went to Paris and I was waiting for the sign, and then the sign didn't come, so I just let the train go back without me to Czechoslovakia.
You couldn't speak French when you arrived?
No.
How did you make a life for yourself in Paris then?
Well, I was babysitter, you don't need to talk much. And then I was cleaning lady once again. I was in Prague, so I was in Paris. Then because I work with the horses, I was working in a farm in Normandy. And then I was dancing with a horse in kind of weird circus in Chantilly, which is 1 hour from Paris. So I did these jobs where you don't need to talk too much.
You have to describe more how you dance with a horse. I've never heard of dancing with horses.
Actually, the owner of the castle, he loved to introduce like the history of riding through the centuries. So he did this dressage very well, and he had his costumes, and he created a show. So he was on his white horse, Largo, and he was doing pas espagnol, and he did all this dressage. And I was dressed in ballerina outfit with the little tiny shoes, and in this deep sand, I was doing the same movements as the horse. So if the horse was doing pas espagnol, I was doing that with my legs and hands. And then when he was cantering, I was cantering next to him with the exact measure with the music of Mozart. It was weird, but it was a lot of fun. But all these professional dancers refuse to do that because they can't dance in the deep sand. So this is why I got a job.
You eventually got into the movie business through Milos Forman. How did you reach him, or what was your connection with Forman?
Milos was in Paris introducing Mozart, Amadeus, and so the Czech community organized some dinner, and it was a lot of fun, and we had a fun, and we talked about his dog, and I just suggested that we should write a postcard to the dog, and Milos, yeah, let's write to Zeman, we will write to my dog. So we wrote, everybody signed, because Milos missed his dog very much, and then he put the address on it, but it wasn't address in New York, it was address at Connecticut, in his farm, which was very simple. It was so simple that I memorized that. Not that I wanted, it just I have a good memory. And then a year later, I was working at a farm. It was very hard. So I was sitting between these animals and the sheep and dogs. And then I wrote a letter to Milos Forman from this farm, just describing what's around. And I regret I don't have this letter. And the letter ended, Mr. Forman, please, if you would know about something better than this, let me know, Martina. And then they started to do the movie Unbearable Lightness of Being in Paris, and Milos recommended me to the production.
You were kind of coaching the actresses who were French, at least Juliette Binoche was French. What exactly were you doing with the actresses?
That was such a weird job. Actually, they hired me to be Czech, so Juliette Binoche and Lena Olin would get inspiration from me. So it went to the extreme that if, let's say, I would bring a squirrel every morning in my arms in a production, everybody would believe that's what the girls in Prague do. I had an unbelievable abstract power over what is it to be Czech girl. So I was going out with them to have a dinner. We talk. They were learning my accent. They were asking questions. It was very abstract work. I didn't have a contract for it, but Sol Zenz told me, you will stay on the movie as long as you are good. So I was fighting for my life because I badly needed the money. So I invented many ways how to be a Czech.
And including bringing a squirrel in the morning?
Exactly. I did anything. They even watched me how to walk the staircase because you do it differently. How you hold the spoon, how you drink, what you do, how you smile.
On the Unbearable Lightness of Being, there were a few Czechs involved, right? There was
Yes.
Pavel Landowski, the great actor. He was appearing in the film. Also, Jan Němec worked in the film. What did Němec do on the movie?
Jan Němec was the Czech advisor, and we had an office together with Jan. And then I worked with him later on his movie in Sweden. It's another story. But our office in the production in Studio Boulogne in Paris, it was so funny. There was a Jan Němec, Martina Skála on the door. And when you opened the door, there was 2 completely empty tables. No one picture on the wall. Nothing. There was an untouched screenplay on the table, which Jan never opened. Because all the other assistants in production had photos and everything was filled with reference to Prague. We had nothing. And Phil Kaufman, the director, he said one day to the crew, he said, if you ever are depressed, just go to the office Skala Němec.
And how was it working with Němec and Landowski?
Well, they are eccentric. I mean, they are extremely talented people. I love to work with Jan Němec because the imagination, we were very close. We really understood very well to each other. So I was doing storyboards for his ideas and his project. And he was very, very smart. Landowski was a lot of fun. But together, they were kind of, I think the American crew was a little bit afraid of them. They were really very strong and very imaginative. And I remember in Dijon, one day we just did these little Czech sausages, špekáčky, on a fire, just behind the hotel. Doesn't matter, it was a 5-star hotel. So it was, how would I say it? It was like carousel, it was a little bit, every day brings a new adventure.
You also worked with Forman directly on Valmont. What were you doing on that movie? Were you a set designer for that?
Yeah, there were 3 art directors and I was one of them. It was a great work. It was in France. We worked on, French castles. It was great atmosphere. It was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I can't imagine that today in Europe, a movie would happen in similar conditions.
You also worked with Forman and Polanski. Tell us about your connection with the Polish director.
I worked with him on several projects, but a few of them never happened, unfortunately, like Master and Margaret, which was fantastic. Then I did the set design for Death and the Maiden with Ben Kingsley and Sigourney Weaver. I liked very much work with Polanski because he's very visual. He's a very good illustrator as well. And I like, when people have this vision also, they can see the things, they can draw them on the paper. And he's extremely, extremely smart and unbelievable charisma. Just to watch him cross the corridor is an event. I mean, he got something about him.
And it was through working with Polanski that you met your French husband.
Yes. I met Francois. He was a still photographer on the movie, and we started to date on the movie, which wouldn't be possible today.
Because of protocols against...
Because of the protocols, because my husband, I followed him to Hollywood, and now before every movie, Francois has to fill out some sort of the sexual harassment...
Some kind of rules that
rules.
you have to
and it's really funny because they show the little videos of some situations, and you have 3 choices, A, B, C, which one is correct or which one is not correct. And I said, Francois, let's do it without looking at the suggestions. Let's do it just like we are. So we did it and we failed. So I'm telling you, we wouldn't be together today.
And you moved to California with your husband. I presume that was also a big turning point in your life.
It was a bigger shock for me to move from Paris to California than from communist Prague to Paris.
And what was so shocking about it?
There is no culture. And Los Angeles, there is no center. This endless boulevard, and then everything is so impersonal. You don't walk. The neighbors, we lived in Hollywood Hills, not far from the Hollywood sign. In Prague and in Paris, you hear the church bells. There you hear helicopters. And it was very impersonal. I felt very lonely. And also the references aren't the same. I have a very good friends in America, absolutely. Now I live 1 hour from San Francisco. Very nice friends, but I believe I just need some sort of European background and the references and the past.
Today, what are your main activities?
I'm writer and I'm illustrator, painter as well, so I do both. I just published 2 novels for adults. Last year it was the Club of Chamois, and it's a novel. It's a novel, and it starts in Prague, in communist Prague. It goes through Paris, and it ends in Hollywood. And yes, it's based on my life, but it's about the freedom, and it's about in Prague in communist time. We thought that the freedom is if you leave the country, and the story is that you leave the country, but the things are not black and white, and then you find another form of imprisonment. It's so many forms. So the question in my novel is, what is the freedom, and do you find it? And if yes, where?
What language do you write in?
In Czech. I have to write in Czech. Because I like to play with the words. And also it's a language, I was born into, and no, I couldn't write in English or French.
You also do children's books?
Yes. I write them and I illustrate them. Actually, my first book was about music, about classical music, and I wrote it for my son, Alexander. And it was when I was in Hollywood, and I felt really, really lonely. All of a sudden, I was single mother in Paris, and I had a friend, and I was working in movies, and all of a sudden, I became housewife in Hollywood Hills, and I was really depressed. So one day I thought, okay, so I can today vacuum, I can walk the dog, I can feed a cat, or I can write a book. I wrote a book.
A lot of celebrities write children's books because I guess it's easy for them, or somebody does it for them. They just add their name to the project. Is that annoying to you as an actual children's author?
No, I never look. I mean, I have my favorite children's books writers or illustrators, but I really don't pay much attention what's around. I do it because I have to do it. I mean, it doesn't matter if it will be published or not. I have projects, they were not published, but I enjoy them to write them and illustrate them very much. Actually, I write and illustrate every day.
Have you continued riding horses over the decades?
Oh, yes. Actually, when I was 6 years old, I thought, so how I will celebrate it. So I crossed the Pyrenees on Andalusian horse. And since then, I ride, every year I do some sort of adventure ride. So I was in Morocco, we were riding Barbarian stallions. That was a crazy ride. And then I went to Ecuador, and we went up to 4,000 meters above the sea on horses. And last summer I crossed Mongolia on the horse, yak, camel and reindeer.
Amazing. Do you spend a lot of time in Prague these days?
Yes, now I am here since 3 months, and I'll come back because I just need to be a little bit more in Europe than before. California is very beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful countries I have seen, but I need culture.
And you were saying also that your son lives in Prague now.
Yeah, my son lives here. He's here since 10 years, and he's working. And it's funny to see through his eyes Prague, because he's fluent in Czech. He speaks fluent French, English, but he didn't grow up here. So, and he has a very international crowd around him. He has also Czech friends, but he has a lot of, French, Germans. It just, I would say he used Prague differently than I did. I'm still a little bit in the old mode.
My final question is, how do you feel today when you walk around Malá Strana?
I feel the same. I still see myself as a little girl. I don't care about tourists. I don't see them. They bumped in me. I don't like these little wheels, but you hear the noise. But it doesn't really affect me.
Many thanks indeed to Martina Skála for sharing her remarkable stories with us for this edition of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. If you've just discovered the pod, there are over 120 previous editions out there waiting for you. Why not check out some of them and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. But for now, from me, Ian Wilby, thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.